On the surface, my life was flawless. The kind of life people post about on social media, the one that draws envious glances at dinner parties. A sprawling home in the suburbs of California, a six-figure job that kept me busy but content, and, of course, my wife, Amanda, the woman I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with. Amanda wasn't just beautiful. She had a presence about her that lit up every room. Strangers adored her. Friends idolized her. And I worshipped her. For 10 years, I built my world around her happiness, sacrificing late nights with friends, career opportunities that would take me out of town, even my own hobbies. But that's what love is, right? You give without expecting anything in return. Except sometimes the giving becomes a trap. The cracks in our perfect illusion were subtle at first. A quiet tension at the dinner table. Her phone, once casually left on the kitchen counter, now glued to her side. "Work is just hectic," she'd say with a strained smile when I asked about her late nights. "You're overthinking, Jack. Relax." And I believed her because I wanted to believe her. Until one evening, as I stood in the driveway after work, I watched her through the window. She was on the phone, laughing. Not the polite chuckle she saved for coworkers, but the kind of laugh that used to be reserved for me. A laugh full of warmth, flirtation, and familiarity. It hit me like a punch to the gut. I shook the thought off, of course. I loved Amanda. Love doesn't question. Love doesn't doubt. But that night, as I lay beside her in bed, staring at the ceiling while she slept soundly next to me, something deep inside shifted. It wasn't anger or jealousy. It was the faint whisper of truth clawing its way to the surface. In that moment, I realized the life I thought I had might not be real at all. It began with little things, the kind that most people would shrug off. A missed text, a forgotten anniversary plan, Amanda's sudden tendency to change the subject when I asked about her day. "Nothing exciting," she'd say with a quick smile, then dive into a completely unrelated story about her coworker or some neighbor gossip. But I noticed the cracks growing wider. One Friday night, she claimed to have a late meeting at work. This wasn't unusual for Amanda. Her job as a marketing executive often demanded late hours. I didn't question it, at least not until I found the receipt on the kitchen counter the next morning. It was from a restaurant, fancy one, the kind of place we'd only go to for anniversaries or special occasions. Her handwriting scrawled across the top read, "Dinner with Lucy." Lucy was her best friend, a name I knew well, but something about it didn't sit right with me. Lucy hated seafood, and this was a seafood restaurant. "Good dinner with Lucy?" I asked casually over breakfast. She froze for half a second, a pause so slight most people wouldn't have noticed. "Yeah, it was great," she said, her voice too light, too rehearsed. "She's stressed about work, poor thing." I nodded but didn't press further. That morning, for the first time in my marriage, I felt like a stranger sitting across from my wife. Then there were the phone calls. Her phone started buzzing more frequently, always on vibrate, always flipped face down. When I'd glance at it, she'd scoop it up, pretending to scroll through Instagram. Once, as I walked past her in the living room, I caught a glimpse of the screen. A message from someone named Eric. "Who's Eric?" I asked, feigning curiosity. "Work contact," she replied without missing a beat. "We're pitching a campaign together." I wanted to believe her. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was being paranoid. But late at night, lying next to her in the darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't just losing Amanda. I was losing my mind. The first real blow came 2 weeks later when I decided to do something I'd never done before. Check her phone. She was in the shower, humming a tune I didn't recognize. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, and my eyes flicked toward it. Another message from Eric. I told myself I wouldn't open it. I told myself I trusted her. But my hand moved on its own, and before I knew it, the screen was unlocked. The messages weren't explicit, but they didn't need to be. "Last night was incredible. Can't stop thinking about you. Can't wait to see you again." My heart dropped. I locked the phone and set it back down, my hands trembling. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't breathe. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to confront her right then and there, to throw the evidence in her face. But I didn't. Instead, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the closed bathroom door, listening to her sing like nothing was wrong. And that's when it hit me. Amanda wasn't just hiding something. She was living an entirely separate life. That night, I stayed up until dawn trying to piece together the puzzle. Every late meeting, every unexplained expense, every text message she quickly dismissed. It all started to add up. But I knew better than to act on impulse. If Amanda had taught me one thing during our marriage, it was patience. I would wait. I would watch. And when the time was right, I would strike. Amanda hadn't always been this way, at least I didn't think so. But as the pieces started falling into place, I couldn't help but reflect on the years we'd spent together. Were the warning signs always there, hidden beneath the surface? Had I ignored them out of love, or was I just too blind to see? She was captivating from the moment we met. Amanda had this effortless charm that drew people to her, including me. I remember how she made me feel in those early days, like I was the only person in the world who truly mattered. She'd laugh at my jokes, even the bad ones, and hang on to every word I said as though I were the most fascinating man alive. But the cracks in her perfection started showing long before I found those text messages. In the early years of our marriage, Amanda had a way of making me feel small without ever raising her voice. She'd critique the way I dressed, the way I spoke, even the way I loaded the dishwasher. "You're too sensitive," she'd say with a dismissive laugh when I told her her words hurt. "I'm just trying to help you be better, Jack. Don't you want to be better?" And I believed her. God help me, I believed her. Her control wasn't loud or obvious. It was quiet, insidious. She'd casually bring up how her friend's husband had surprised her with a luxury vacation, or how another couple she knew had just bought a bigger house. "We could have that too," she'd say, her tone soft, almost wistful. "If only you worked a little harder." I worked harder, but no matter how much I gave, it was never enough. If I made dinner, she'd complain about the seasoning. If I planned a weekend getaway, she'd nitpick the accommodations. And every time I tried to confront her about how it made me feel, she'd twist the conversation until I was the one apologizing. Looking back, I realize now that Amanda didn't just want love. She wanted control, and she got it by making me doubt myself at every turn. The worst part? I let her. By the time the signs of her affair started to appear, I was already a shell of the man I used to be. My confidence was shot, my instincts dulled. She'd spent years convincing me that my feelings didn't matter, that my concerns were irrational, that I was lucky to have her. And maybe I was. At least, that's what I told myself every time she laughed at my insecurities or rolled her eyes at my attempts to reconnect. But now, as I sat alone in our darkened living room, replaying those text messages over and over in my mind, something inside me shifted. For the first time in years, I felt anger. Not the quiet, simmering kind I'd learned to swallow, but something raw and electric, something alive. She'd taken so much from me. My self-esteem, my voice, my trust. But this was different. This was betrayal on a level I couldn't ignore. I realized then that I couldn't confront her just yet. Amanda was too clever, too manipulative. She'd twist my words, turn my evidence against me, and make me feel like the bad guy. If I was going to take back control, I needed more than a gut feeling and a few text messages. I needed proof. Solid, undeniable proof. As I sat in the dark, the faint sound of Amanda's laughter echoing from upstairs, I made a silent promise to myself. I would uncover the truth, no matter what it took. And when I did, I wouldn't just confront her. I would destroy her. The proof I needed came sooner than I expected, though not in the way I imagined. It wasn't a dramatic confession or an incriminating voicemail. No, Amanda was far too careful for that. Instead, it was something small, almost innocuous. A single slip that opened the floodgates of doubt. It happened on an unremarkable Tuesday. Amanda had left for work early, claiming she had back-to-back meetings all day. I didn't think much of it until I came home that evening and noticed a folded receipt left on the kitchen counter. At first, I didn't pay it much attention. I assumed it was another grocery bill or dry cleaning pickup. But as I reached for it to throw it away, the name of the restaurant caught my eye. Le Soleil Bistro. It wasn't just any restaurant. Le Soleil was one of the most exclusive spots in town, the kind of place where you had to book weeks in advance. Amanda and I had dined there only once years ago, for our 5th wedding anniversary. I still remembered how she'd raved about the truffle pasta and insisted we take a photo by the candlelit fountain. But that memory wasn't what made my stomach twist into knots. It was the date on the receipt, the same Tuesday afternoon she claimed to have been stuck in meetings. My pulse quickened as I unfolded the receipt further, scanning for more details. 2 entrees, a bottle of wine. The bill was extravagant, far more than Amanda would spend on a solo lunch. And then, there it was, scrawled in her neat handwriting across the top. Dinner with Lucy. Lucy, of course, her ever-reliable alibi. I picked up my phone and dialed Lucy without hesitation. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice cheerful. "Hey Jack, what's up?" "Hey Lucy," I said, keeping my tone light. "I was just wondering how your dinner with Amanda went the other night. She told me you two went to Le Soleil." There was a pause, just long enough to confirm what I already suspected. "Dinner," Lucy said, her voice tinged with confusion. "Oh no, I haven't seen Amanda in weeks. We've both been so busy." The world seemed to tilt beneath me. I thanked her and hung up, my hands trembling. The receipt felt heavier in my hand now, its meaning undeniable. Amanda had lied. And not just a little white lie, a deliberate, calculated fabrication. For the rest of the evening, I couldn't look at her the same way. When she walked through the door, her smile radiant and her cheeks flushed as though she'd had the best day, I felt something dark and sharp curl in my chest. "How was work?" I asked casually, forcing myself to meet her eyes. "Exhausting," she sighed, kicking off her heels. "We're so swamped right now. I barely had time to eat." I stared at her, studying every detail of her face. The way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The way her lips curved into a soft smile, as though she were truly happy to see me. How long had she been doing this? Lying to my face, looking me in the eye as though I were nothing more than an obstacle in her carefully crafted life? I didn't confront her that night. Instead, I tucked the receipt into my desk drawer, a physical reminder of her betrayal. It wasn't enough to act on, not yet, but it was a start. That night, as Amanda slept soundly beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the receipt burning in my mind. She thought she was smarter than me, that her lies were impenetrable. But she didn't know me as well as she thought. I wasn't just going to catch her. I was going to make her regret every single lie she ever told me. The receipt was just the beginning. I knew it wasn't enough on its own, but it lit a fire inside me. A cold, calculating determination to uncover every layer of Amanda's lies. I wasn't just going to confront her. I was going to dismantle the illusion she'd built, piece by piece. The next morning, as she stood at the counter sipping her coffee, scrolling through her phone, I watched her. I'd always thought I knew her so well, every habit, every subtle tick. But now, even the smallest gestures felt suspect. Her phone, that damned phone. She never used to guard it so fiercely. Years ago, she'd leave it lying around, the screen lighting up with random notifications. But now, it was always face down, always locked with a password I didn't know. When it buzzed, she'd casually angle her body away, as though shielding the screen from my view. I needed to get into it. That night, I waited until she fell asleep, her breathing slow and steady beside me. I'd spent hours earlier researching ways to bypass a phone lock screen. Most of them were useless, but one idea stood out: facial recognition. Holding my breath, I carefully lifted her phone from the nightstand. The faint glow of the screen illuminated her peaceful face, and for a moment, guilt crept in. This was my wife, the woman I'd vowed to trust and protect. But then I remembered the receipt, the lies, the message from Eric. I tilted the phone toward her face. The lock screen vanished. My chest tightened as I scrolled through her messages, my fingers trembling. I started with Eric. There they were, hundreds of texts, some playful, some flirtatious, and some so explicit I had to look away for a moment just to process them. "I can't stop thinking about last night," You're intoxicating. When can I see you again? This weekend. I love the way you make me feel alive, Amanda. Alive. The word burned. What was I then? Dead weight? The husband she came home to only to play the role of a dutiful wife? But it wasn't just Eric. There were others. Names I didn't recognize. Conversations that suggested more than casual friendships. Amanda wasn't just unfaithful. She was living an entirely separate life. I locked the phone and placed it back on the nightstand, careful not to wake her. My mind raced as I sat in the living room, staring out into the dark. The anger I felt was unlike anything I'd experienced before. It wasn't fiery or explosive. It was cold, deliberate, and consuming. I wasn't just hurt. I was humiliated. How long had she been playing me for a fool? How many times had I been the last to know? But anger alone wasn't enough. I needed more proof, something concrete, something undeniable. Amanda had spent years honing her skills as a manipulator. If I confronted her now, she'd twist the narrative, make me doubt myself, and somehow come out as the victim. So I decided to go further. The next day, I installed a small tracking app on her phone. It wasn't hard. Amanda had never been particularly tech-savvy. The app would give me access to her location, messages, and even her call history. I hated myself for stooping to this level, but I told myself it was necessary. Within hours, the results were damning. Her location history revealed frequent trips to places she had no reason to be. Luxury hotels, secluded restaurants, even Eric's address. Her messages were a treasure trove of lies, each one more incriminating than the last. But the most gut-wrenching discovery came later that week. While Amanda was at work, I rifled through her closet, searching for anything that might confirm what I already knew. Hidden in the back, behind old coats and shoeboxes, I found a small, locked drawer. Breaking it open wasn't hard. Inside I found photos. Photos of her with Eric. Photos of her with another man I didn't recognize. Smiling, laughing, kissing. There was no denying it now. Amanda wasn't just cheating. She was living a double life, one where I was nothing more than a convenient accessory. I carefully put everything back where I found it, my hands shaking with rage and adrenaline. She thought she was untouchable, that her lies would never catch up with her. But she was wrong. That night, as I sat at the dining table with her across from me, smiling and laughing like nothing was wrong, I made a silent vow. Amanda had taken everything from me. My trust, my dignity, my sense of self. But now I was going to take something from her. Her carefully constructed life was about to crumble, and I would be the one to light the match. By now, I wasn't the man Amanda thought she could manipulate anymore. The hurt, confusion, and disbelief that had once clouded my mind had hardened into something sharper, more focused. I wasn't going to be the clueless husband she lied to, the naive man she walked over. I was going to become her reckoning. I spent the next few days carefully planning my next move. Confronting Amanda head-on wasn't an option. Not yet. She'd perfected the art of deflection and manipulation, and any premature confrontation would only give her the upper hand. I needed her cornered, unable to twist her way out. The first step was to gather more evidence. I'd already collected enough from her phone, but I wanted something she couldn't dispute, something tangible. I hired a private investigator. His name was Richard, a grizzled man in his late 50s with an air of quiet competence. When I told him my situation, he didn't bat an eye. "Cheaters all think they're invincible," he said with a wry smile. "Don't worry, Jack. We'll get what you need." I gave him the details. Eric's address, the locations Amanda frequented, even the names I'd found in her messages. Richard assured me he'd be discreet, and I believed him. While Richard worked in the shadows, I focused on keeping up appearances at home. It was harder than I expected. Every time Amanda smiled at me, every time she kissed my cheek or asked about my day, I had to fight the urge to lash out. How could she act so normal, so unaffected, knowing what she was doing behind my back? But I played my part. "Dinner on Friday?" she asked one evening, her voice light and casual. "Sure," I replied, masking the bitterness in my tone. "Just the two of us?" She hesitated just for a fraction of a second. Actually, I might have to stay late at work. I'll let you know. It was always work. Always the same excuse. By Friday, Richard had results. We met in a small coffee shop downtown, away from prying eyes. He slid a manila envelope across the table, his expression grim. You were right, he said simply. Inside were photos, timestamps, and detailed reports. Amanda and Eric at a hotel. Amanda at a different restaurant with another man. The photos were damning. Her hand on Eric's arm, her lips brushing his cheek, her body language intimate and unmistakable. I stared at the photos for a long time, my chest tight. Seeing it on paper in black and white made it all the more real. What do you want to do with this? Richard asked, his voice low. I didn't answer right away. My mind was racing, formulating a plan. Finally, I looked up at him. I'm going to confront her, I said. But not yet. She needs to feel safe first, like she's still in control. Richard nodded. Smart. Let me know if you need anything else. That evening, I came home with the envelope tucked under my arm. Amanda was in the kitchen, humming to herself as she prepared dinner. The smell of garlic and rosemary filled the air, a stark contrast to the cold storm brewing inside me. How was your day? She asked, flashing me that perfect smile. Good, I said, forcing myself to smile back. Yours? Busy as always, she replied, her tone breezy. Work's been so crazy lately. I leaned against the counter, watching her move around the kitchen. She looked so at ease, so confident in her ability to deceive me. But I wasn't the same man anymore. As we sat down for dinner, I glanced at her across the table. She talked about her day, about her so-called co-workers, about the new project she was working on. I nodded along, letting her think I was hanging on to her every word. Inside, I was already plotting my next move. I wasn't just going to confront Amanda. I was going to make her face the full weight of her lies, the full depth of her betrayal. And when the moment came, I wanted to see the look in her eyes when she realized there was no way out. The trap was set. All I had to do now was wait. The waiting was the hardest part. Knowing what I knew, holding it all inside, watching her live her double life as though nothing had changed. It was a test of patience I wasn't sure I could pass. But I had to. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming myself, my dignity, my power. Amanda's lies had become a tangled web, and she didn't even realize how tightly she was ensnared in it. The week passed uneventfully, at least on the surface. She continued her routine of early mornings, work meetings, and late nights. I continued mine, acting the part of the oblivious husband while quietly preparing for the moment when everything would come crashing down. On Thursday evening, as Amanda scrolled through her phone on the couch, I decided to probe just a little. You've been so busy lately, I said, keeping my tone light. We should plan a getaway once things calm down. Just the two of us. She glanced up, her smile easy but her eyes guarded. That sounds amazing, Jack. I just need to get through the next couple of weeks. Work's been crazy, you know? Yeah, I know, I said, forcing a chuckle. You're always working so hard. She reached over and squeezed my hand, her touch warm and reassuring. You're the best for understanding. I'm so lucky to have you. The words hit like a slap. Lucky to have me? The gall of it. She had no idea the storm that was coming. The next morning, she left the house earlier than usual, claiming she had a breakfast meeting with a client. I watched from the window as her car disappeared down the street, then grabbed my phone and opened the tracking app. Sure enough, she wasn't heading toward her office. Her location pinged at a boutique hotel downtown, the same one from Richard's photos. My jaw tightened as I stared at the screen, my emotions a volatile mix of rage and cold determination. It was time to act. I spent the day preparing for what was to come. I called my lawyer, laying out everything I'd uncovered. He assured me that, with the evidence I had, the divorce proceedings would be swift and decisive. Next, I went to the bank and secured our financial accounts, ensuring Amanda wouldn't have access to any funds once the papers were filed. I wasn't going to let her walk away with everything, not after what she'd done. Finally, I gathered everything, the photos, the messages, the receipts. I organized them into a neat, damning pile and placed them in a folder. It was a weapon, not of violence but of truth, and I was ready to use it. When Amanda came home that evening, she was all smiles, her demeanor as cheerful and carefree as ever. "How was your day?" she asked, hanging her coat by the door. "Uneventful," I replied, watching her carefully. "Yours?" "Busy as always," she said, laughing softly. "I'm exhausted." I nodded, suppressing the anger bubbling beneath the surface. "You should get some rest then. Big weekend ahead." She raised an eyebrow, curious. "What's happening this weekend?" "You'll see," I said, forcing a smile. "Just a little surprise." Her laugh was light, but there was a flicker of unease in her eyes. She didn't press further, and I didn't offer any more details. That night, as she slept soundly beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. Tomorrow would be the day, the moment I'd been waiting for. I wasn't just going to confront her. I was going to unravel her lies in the cold light of day, where she couldn't hide, couldn't deflect, couldn't manipulate. The calm before the storm was over. Tomorrow everything would change. Friday dawned, cold and gray, as though the weather itself sensed the storm brewing in our home. Amanda left early again, her cheerful goodbye echoing hollowly in the stillness of the house. She had no idea what was coming, no clue that her carefully constructed world was about to collapse. I spent the morning rehearsing what I'd say, not because I wasn't sure, but because I wanted to control every detail. Every word, every pause, every look. I wanted her to feel the weight of her lies, the sharp edges of the truth she had tried so hard to bury. By the time she returned that evening, I was ready. "Hi, Jack," she called out as she walked through the door, her tone as breezy as ever. "Sorry I'm late. Traffic was a nightmare." I didn't respond immediately. I sat at the dining table, the folder of evidence in front of me, waiting. When she stepped into the room, her smile faltered. She must have sensed it, the tension in the air, the deliberate stillness of my posture. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice cautious. "We need to talk," I said, my tone calm but cold. I gestured to the chair across from me. "Sit." Her eyes darted to the folder, then back to me. "Jack, you're scaring me." "What is this?" "Sit down, Amanda." She hesitated but finally took the seat across from me, her movements slow and deliberate. For a moment, I said nothing, letting the silence stretch between us. I wanted her to feel it, the weight of my gaze, the gravity of the moment. Then I slid the folder across the table. "Open it." Her hands trembled as she reached for the folder. She flipped it open, her eyes scanning the photos, the messages, the receipts. Her face went pale, her breath hitching as the realization hit her. "Jack," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I can explain." "Don't," I interrupted, my tone sharp. "Don't you dare insult me by pretending there's an explanation for this." She looked up at me, tears welling in her eyes. "It's not what it looks like. Eric and I." "It's exactly what it looks like," I snapped, my voice rising for the first time. "Do you think I'm stupid, Amanda? Do you think I didn't notice the lies, the excuses, the sudden late nights? You've been lying to me for God knows how long, and now you want to sit there and deny it." Her tears spilled over, but I felt no sympathy, no softness. "Not anymore. Jack, please," she begged. "I never meant to hurt you. It just happened." I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "It just happened? Affairs don't just happen, Amanda. Sneaking around, lying to my face, meeting him at hotels, those are choices. Choices you made over and over again." She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. "I'm sorry," she choked out. "I'm so sorry." "Sorry doesn't cut it," I said, my voice icy. "You didn't just betray me, Amanda. You humiliated me. You took everything we built together and threw it away like it meant nothing." She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. "I love you, Jack. I swear I do." "Love." I spat the word like poison. "You don't destroy someone you love. You don't lie to them, cheat on them, and then expect them to just forgive you. The room fell silent, the only sound her quiet sobs. I stood, grabbing the folder and walking toward the door. "Jack, please," she cried, her voice desperate. "Don't do this. We can fix this. We can go to counseling, we can—" "It's too late for that," I said, cutting her off. "I've already spoken to a lawyer. The divorce papers will be ready by Monday. You can sign them, or I can take this evidence to court and make sure you walk away with nothing. Your choice." Her face crumpled, but I didn't care. This wasn't about her anymore. This was about me, taking back control, reclaiming my life. I turned and walked out, leaving her alone in the wreckage of her lies. As I stepped outside, the cold air hit me like a slap, sharp and bracing. For the first time in months, I felt something like clarity, like freedom. Amanda had taken so much from me, but she wouldn't take any more. This was the end of her story, and the beginning of mine. The next few days felt like a blur. The aftermath of the confrontation had left me numb, adrift in a sea of emotions I didn't know how to process. I had done what I needed to do. I had confronted Amanda, shown her the truth, and taken the necessary steps to sever ties. But even after everything, I couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness that clung to me. The house felt different now. Hollow. Amanda had vacated the bedroom, leaving only the scent of her perfume lingering in the air like a ghost. Her things were still here, her clothes, her makeup, her half-drunk cups of coffee. But it didn't matter. All of it was just a reminder of the woman who had lied, betrayed, and destroyed everything I'd trusted. I spent the first couple of days holed up in the house, not answering calls or responding to messages. My phone buzzed constantly, mostly from people who didn't know what had happened, who had no idea why I'd suddenly become so distant. I ignored it all, too exhausted to even pretend that I cared about small talk. Then came Monday, the day I had waited for. The lawyer's office was stark, cold, and clinical, a far cry from the warm, inviting atmosphere I'd imagined when I'd first gotten married. I sat across from my attorney, signing document after document, each one sealing the fate of my marriage. The papers were filled with terms, child custody arrangements, alimony, division of assets, but none of it felt real. None of it seemed to matter in the face of what I had lost. As I signed the final page, my lawyer gave me a sympathetic smile. "It's over now, Jack. You did the right thing. It's going to be hard, but you'll get through it." I nodded, but his words didn't bring me any comfort. I wasn't sure what getting through it meant anymore. How do you move forward when the person you trusted more than anyone in the world has destroyed everything? When I left the office, I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, breathing in the crisp air. Felt like the first real breath I'd taken in months. The weight of Amanda's lies was gone, but the scars they left behind were still fresh. I didn't know where to go from here, but I couldn't stay in the same place. I needed change. The first thing I did was move out of the house. It wasn't much, just a small apartment in a part of the city I'd never really spent time in. But it was mine. The walls were bare, and the furniture sparse, but it was a fresh start. The smell of new paint, the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the absence of Amanda's presence. It all felt strangely comforting. I spent the next few weeks focusing on myself. I threw myself into work, trying to ignore the ache inside that never quite went away. I started going to the gym, not because I wanted to look better, but because I needed a way to release the anger, the sadness, the hurt that I didn't know how to express. I also started therapy. It felt like a step in the right direction, even if it was uncomfortable at first. Talking about what happened, letting someone else in, was harder than I expected. I hadn't realized how much I had been holding in. But as each session passed, I began to unravel the knots that had built up inside me. But it wasn't just about self-improvement or distraction. It was about confronting the truth of what Amanda had done, and what I had allowed to happen. I wasn't innocent in this. I had ignored the signs, had let my own insecurities cloud my judgment, had clung to a marriage that was already broken. That was the hardest part to admit. But once I did, something shifted inside me. I wasn't a victim anymore. I wasn't the man Amanda had fooled into believing that everything was fine. I was someone who had seen the darkness, who had felt the betrayal, and had chosen to survive it. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick. But I was beginning to heal. And then, as though the universe had decided to give me a sign, I ran into someone at the coffee shop one morning. Her name was Claire. She was kind, warm, and refreshingly honest. A sharp contrast to the deceitful world I'd been trapped in for so long. She didn't know anything about my past, and I didn't tell her. There was no need. But as we sat together, chatting about everything and nothing, I felt a glimmer of hope, a tiny spark that maybe, just maybe, I could move on. The pain would never completely fade, but with time, I knew I would be okay. As I left the coffee shop that morning, a new chapter began to unfold. One that I would write, one day at a time with my own hands. Moving on wasn't something that happened overnight. It wasn't as simple as signing the divorce papers, leaving the house, or even starting therapy. It was an ongoing battle, an emotional tug-of-war between the past I was desperately trying to leave behind and the future that seemed uncertain at best. I had always considered myself a strong man, someone who could handle anything life threw at me. But what Amanda had done shattered that belief, and now every day felt like a test. I wasn't sure who I was anymore, or what I wanted, or how to trust myself again. It was during those quiet moments of reflection that the weight of it all hit the hardest. The nights when I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, wondering how I had gotten here, wondering if I could ever truly let go of the anger and betrayal. But then there was Claire. It had started innocently enough. We met at the coffee shop, exchanged pleasantries, talked about everything from books to life's little oddities. The conversation had felt easy, refreshing, even in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. Her smile, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her passions, the kindness that radiated from her. It was like a balm to my soul, soothing the raw edges Amanda's betrayal had left behind. I wasn't looking for a relationship. I wasn't sure I was ready for anything. But Claire was there, a quiet presence, a breath of fresh air in a world that had been suffocating me. We began talking more often. At first, it was just small talk, texts here and there, casual coffee meetups. But gradually, I began to find myself opening up to her in ways I hadn't expected. She listened, not just with her ears, but with her heart. She didn't judge me or try to fix me. She just let me be. And that was the first step toward healing, I realized. One evening, about a month after we'd first met, we were sitting in a quiet park, watching the sunset. The golden light seemed to wash over everything, bathing the world in a warm glow. "You're quiet tonight," Claire said, her voice soft. I smiled faintly, not sure what to say. The weight of everything, my past, the pain, the hurt I was still processing, felt heavy in the air between us. "I'm just thinking," I said finally, "about how much I've let go, and how much I still have to." She turned to me, her expression gentle but understanding. "It's a long road. You don't have to have it all figured out right now, Jack." I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in a long while. There was something about Claire, something that felt safe, something that made me want to believe again. "I know," I said quietly, "but sometimes it's hard to trust, to let go of the past, to trust myself again." Claire didn't say anything at first. Instead, she reached out and touched my hand, her fingers warm and comforting. "You don't have to do it alone," she said simply. The simple act of her touch, the warmth in her voice, made something inside me shift. For the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to believe that I could move forward. That maybe, just maybe, I could rebuild. It wasn't easy. I still had days when the memories of Amanda's betrayal came crashing down. Days when the pain felt like it would swallow me whole. There were nights when I would lie awake, haunted by the image of her with Eric, by the lies she'd told me, by the way she'd broken me. But Claire helped me through those nights. Slowly, patiently, she showed me that the past didn't have to define me, that there was more to life than the betrayal I had suffered. I wasn't sure what the future held. I wasn't sure if I was ready for another relationship, or if I even wanted one. But with Claire, I wasn't afraid to explore the possibility. She wasn't a replacement for Amanda, and I wasn't trying to replace anyone. But she was someone who made me believe in myself again, in the possibility of something good, something real. As the weeks went on, I found myself growing stronger. I took small steps forward, pushed myself to face my fears and doubts. I continued therapy, continued rebuilding my life, and slowly I started to feel like myself again. The hardest step was trusting myself. It was easier to blame Amanda, to focus on what she had done to me. But the truth was, I had allowed it to happen. I had ignored the signs, put my trust in someone who didn't deserve it, and let my own insecurities keep me in a marriage that was already broken. It wasn't just about letting go of Amanda. It was about letting go of the parts of myself that had allowed her betrayal to take root. It was about reclaiming my sense of self-worth, about rediscovering the person I had been before I let someone else define my happiness. And that, in itself, was the most powerful thing I could do. It wasn't just Amanda I needed to confront. It was myself, the version of me that had allowed her betrayal to destroy my sense of self. I spent days reflecting, pushing through the anger, the hurt, the self-doubt. But it wasn't until I sat alone in the quiet of my new apartment one night that I truly faced it. I had spent so long focusing on Amanda's lies, on what she had done to me, that I had never really questioned the role I played. I had ignored my gut, avoided the red flags, and let my insecurities guide my decisions. I had stayed in a marriage that wasn't healthy because I was afraid of facing the truth, that I deserved more. That was the hardest pill to swallow. But once I did, something inside me shifted. I could finally see a future that didn't revolve around the past. The next day, I called my lawyer and finalized the divorce. It was official. Amanda and I were no longer bound by anything except the shared history we had left behind. I didn't feel victorious, though. I didn't feel like I had won. I simply felt lighter. I was free. Life after the divorce wasn't a smooth path. There was no sudden burst of clarity or an overwhelming sense of freedom. Instead, there was a quiet, persistent uncertainty that followed me like a shadow. I didn't know what came next. The future felt like a blank page, and for the first time in years, I was both terrified and relieved by the possibility. I could do anything now, but the weight of that choice made it feel like anything was possible, and nothing was certain. Work was a distraction, but it didn't fill the emptiness. I spent hours in the office working longer than I ever had, but I could feel the distance between who I had been and who I was becoming. It was unsettling. Claire had become a constant presence in my life, but I didn't rush anything. We kept it slow, casual, and unspoken. She never pressured me, always respecting the space I needed. We'd meet for coffee, take walks around the city, talk about our lives. She never tried to fill the hole Amanda had left, but she quietly showed me what it felt like to trust again. One evening, as I stood on my balcony, watching the city lights flicker like stars, I realized something. The uncertainty wasn't something to fear. It was a chance to rebuild, to be the person I had always been before all the pain, before the betrayal. For the first time in months, I felt hope. The future was unwritten, and it was mine to create. The next few months were a quiet revolution. I started to make decisions based on what I wanted, not what I thought I should do or what I had been trained to expect. I wasn't the man Amanda had left behind, nor was I the man I had been in the months before everything fell apart. I was someone new. I took a trip, something spontaneous. I flew to a city I'd never been to, without plans, just to explore. I wandered through unfamiliar streets, ate food I'd never tried, and let myself get lost in a place where nobody knew my name or my past. For the first time in so long, I felt a sense of freedom. There were no expectations, no weight, no history. It was just me. And for the first time in a long time, I liked who I was becoming. Claire and I continued to spend time together, though we hadn't labeled anything. There were moments, small, quiet moments, where I felt something spark again. But I wasn't in a rush to define it. She didn't push, and neither did I. There was a calmness in that, a mutual respect for the journey we were both on. Still, there were days when doubt crept in. The fear of making the same mistakes again, of opening up to someone who might betray me just as Amanda had. But each time, I remembered how far I had come. I remembered that I had survived the worst, and that, in itself, was a victory. It had been nearly a year since the divorce was finalized, and in that time, I had come to a place I hadn't expected: peace. The raw pain that had once consumed me had dulled into something more manageable. I wasn't happy all the time, but I had learned to live with the scars. I had learned that they didn't define me. I stood in front of the mirror one morning, studying the reflection of the man I had become. I wasn't the broken, angry person I had been when I left Amanda. I had rebuilt myself piece by piece, and though the process had been painful, I was stronger for it. I had started taking care of myself, mentally, physically, and emotionally. I worked out regularly, something I hadn't done in years, and I felt stronger than I had in ages. But it wasn't just about the physical changes. It was about how I saw myself. I had learned to stand on my own, without the crutch of a toxic relationship, without the need for someone else's approval. Claire was still in my life, and as the months passed, we grew closer. There were no grand declarations of love, no rush to fill a void. We enjoyed each other's company, took things one step at a time. In her presence, I felt at ease, and that was enough for now. But more importantly, I had finally realized something. I was enough. I didn't need validation from anyone. I didn't need to prove anything to the world. I was whole on my own. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid to look ahead. The future was uncertain, but I didn't mind. I had learned that uncertainty wasn't something to fear. It was a canvas waiting to be painted with whatever I chose. I had no idea where my journey would take me, but I knew this. I would face it on my own terms, with the strength I had earned. And that, in itself, was freedom. The journey from betrayal to freedom wasn't linear. It wasn't about a single moment of clarity or a dramatic turning point. It was about the slow, painful process of healing, learning to trust again, and most importantly, learning to trust myself. The scars Amanda left would never completely fade, but they didn't control me anymore. They were simply reminders of the strength I had found, the resilience I had built when everything seemed lost. I had faced my darkest moments and walked through them, and now I was living my life on my own terms. There was a freedom in that, a freedom I had never known before. I didn't know what the future would bring, but for the first time in years, I was ready to embrace it. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: we all have the power to rebuild, to start again, no matter how broken we feel. The past can hurt, but it doesn't define us. What matters is what we choose to do with the pieces we're left with. And so, I move forward, stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever comes next. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to rebuild after betrayal? Let me know how you overcame it or what you're still working through. And if you want to see more stories like this, hit that subscribe button. Take care, and remember, you're never as lost as you think you are.